Hello, we'll get started in a second. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to try and get started right at 4. I know a lot of people kind of trickle in afterwards and there's some other, calls. It's a busy week. But we'll try and get started right at 4. If you have any questions, throw them into the Q&A section. We're going to try to address as many as possible. This call might run a little bit longer, but I'm going to try and squeeze as much as I can into the hour so that you guys get all the questions and information that you're looking for. All right, I'm going to start my little preamble here so we can really get into the weeds here. No pun intended at 4. As I mentioned, this will, in the chat, this will be recorded and shared with all registrants as well as in the CABA membership newsletter. There were a lot of people that wanted to make sure that this was going to be recorded so it could be shared publicly. We will be sharing this one. I know there's a lot of questions about some of the activity we've seen over the last couple of weeks. It's been very exciting to see so much momentum. But I'm going to kind of break down what's happened, why it matters, what's next, and what to expect. As well as giving some market updates. So I'm going to get going here and jump right into the content so that we can try and answer as many questions as possible. If you have any questions, throw them into the Q&A section. I will try to address as many as possible by the end of the hour here. We might run a little bit long just because there's a lot of content, and I'm going to try and stay on as long as possible for everyone. So with that, I will jump right into it. Welcome to our Today in THC Beverage monthly webinar, which ironically the acronym is TTB. Just realizing this after a year and a half of doing these calls. But we're going to jump into a market update, but primarily focused on the federal landscape. As always, I will do an intro to CABA because we do have some new people who've registered for this call, and I know that there's a number of people who couldn't attend that this would have been their first call. So we're going to go over the basics to federal policy. A big reason for this was over the last couple of weeks at all the events I was attending, many people had a lot of questions that we've addressed in earlier episodes, if you will, but as a result, some people were still getting caught up to speed, and I wanted to make sure everyone understood the players involved, what challenges we have ahead of us, state versus federal landscape, as well as some strategy, because this ultimately is impacting how people are making decisions for their business. So I'm going to try to cover as much as possible today, and of course, always feel free to email me if you have additional questions. I will try to get to all of those today if I can. We are also going to talk about market updates, event recaps, hot topics, and how you can support. There's a couple immediate call to actions, and we're going to talk about the urgency with these call to actions. Sometimes we ask for things and it's like, hey, if you can get that to us when you can. We are currently in a position where we are asking for things. We need them like yesterday. So the quicker we can get things, followed up on, it's better. I hate being that person. As a marketer, usually people are like, oh, we need that yesterday. And you kind of roll your eyes. This is different. Regulatory, and we're going to talk about the timelines and why, if we ask for something, myself, HBA, WSWA, NBWA, any group, if they're asking for assistance in something, try to prioritize it if you can. Introduction to CABA, the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives. We are the longest standing beverage, hemp beverage only group on the Hill that is focused primarily on federal legislation. We do help support state groups who need education or third party support when it comes to education or guidance on what we're seeing in other states or at the federal level, but we focus primarily on making sure that this category stays open, legal, and has an alcohol regulatory framework in place sooner rather than later for the THC beverage category. A lot of what we advocate for is very similar to what you would see in the alcohol regulatory framework because we want to be treated like other adult beverages and sold and served where adult beverages are commonly found. With that, we'll jump right into it. What do we want? Regulation. When do we want it? Before November 12th. No matter what, I want everyone on this call to know that regardless of November's outcome, THC beverages are here to stay. This is a category that has continued to grow. There's demand from the consumer. We are going to keep fighting for them and for them to be regulated like other adult beverages, regardless of what happens November. But yes, we are facing a threat that could create a real stutter step come November. So what are we asking for? 3-tier system. We want to even the playing field. We want trade practice laws and taxation, just like what we see on the alcohol side. We want to see states' rights, again, similar to alcohol. Things like direct to consumer are often handled at the state level. And we want to support THC and intoxication research. This is important because these are things that exist, again, for the alcohol industry, and we want to be treated the same. In order to get our champions, or I should say some of our challenges or challengers rather on board, and that oftentimes are the alcohol suppliers or other groups that are being held to the restrictions within the three-tier system, we need to work towards achieving those same goals and getting the three-tier system guardrails, which means restrictions as well as the benefits of the three-tier system. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and why that's so important, but this is the core of what we are pushing for. And we need to show dedication to regulation for us to make any headway leading into November. So let's first talk about how we got here, which this actually might look a little bit larger on your screen than it does on mine, but I realize it's an eye chart. We're going to go over how we got here, what happened last November, and then we're going to zoom in on the last few months and then over the last couple of weeks and talk about the momentum we've seen. So first and foremost, we had the funding package. I think everyone was aware of that at the end of in November. That was where the Mitch McConnell's language to put a 0.4 milligram of THC per container cap into the funding package for the upcoming year. It is important to note that at that time, while there was a vote, the vote was about reopening the government. If they had voted on the floor to accept Rand Paul's amendment, it would have gone back and forth and delayed reopening the government. It's also important to know that that vote was not specific to hemp beverage in particular. When we talk about the infrastructure that we want to see in place for our category, we are consistently met with, that makes a lot of sense, that infrastructure works, it's familiar, it's already been built, and it just needs some modifications for the nuances of hemp THC and how we want these products dosed and distributed around the country. So as a result, there are some nuances, but what we're asking for the most part already exists. We just need to modify it. So we're not met with a lot of opposition. However, there's been a lot of activity since November. There have been regulatory bills introduced, like Senator Wyden and Jeff Merkley. This is the Cannabinoid Safety and Regulation Act, oftentimes very broad, but did include some recommendations for the beverage category that we would support. And then come December, we saw the executive order. And this was the first time that we saw the White House, and particularly the president, address hemp as well as talking about the CMS program, which is the Medicare program for senior citizens to get reimbursed for full spectrum CBD products, which is the primary goal of the CMS program and the president. It's important to understand that that currently does not include things like hemp-derived THC beverages, which we are advocating for as an adult beverage alternative and more of an intoxicating product versus a therapeutic or wellness product. So it's important to understand that distinction. However, in order for that program, which piloted in April, in order for that program to exist beyond November 12th, there needs to be a definition change or some sort of shift to that 0.4 milligrams THC per container cap for that program to continue living on, which is why we continue to see it being brought up in regular bills, in announcements and letters from the Office of Management and Budget, which we're going to get into in depth in a second. But this was the beginning, December 2025 was the beginning of seeing that coming from the White House and that directive and that urgency coming for a change of that definition, and it not just coming from the quote unquote hemp industry that's been lobbying to make those adjustments. Then we saw extensions and other regulatory bills from Morgan Griffith's office. There were extensions introduced by Jim Baird and Angie Craig. We've seen states' rights bills introduced, which was Senator Rand Paul and Senator Amy Klobuchar out of Minnesota. We've seen a lot of things be introduced, which continues to show that there is interest in regulating our category and other portions of the hemp industry versus banning them. And that's important for the momentum. And again, momentum starts at the bottom. Momentum doesn't start in the middle. So we had the start at the bottom and now we're here. And we're going to go through kind of all of those different stages and what that means. But there's still a lot more to come and a lot more momentum that we need to continue building on. So it's important that we all understand that what's happened over the last week does not mean that urgency has dropped. If anything, we need to continue maintaining that momentum and keep it moving. Then in April, we also saw the DOJ formal rescheduling of medical marijuana to Schedule 1, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. again, does not impact the hemp industry and what we need for hemp beverage. And then there's April, May, and June. So the last quarter, Q2 here, where real momentum has really started to shift. So we've seen the CMS program launch, which obviously is important because they defined non-intoxicating products as up to 3 milligrams per serving, not per container, per serving. So obviously for that, at minimum, the definition change from that 0.4 milligrams of THC per container needs to change to at least 3 milligrams per serving. The question has always been whether or not that will apply only to products that qualify for this Medicare system, or if there's room to open it up for other products, including hemp-derived THC beverages. Then you look at May and you start seeing drafts getting circulated, engagement from the White House. Congressman Andy Barr starts circulating a bill and has made a couple attempts at attaching it to other bills for various reasons on the strategy side that I'm not going to dig into in particular. Those were introduced and then withdrawn or seen as non-germane, but it got the conversation going and continued to show momentum in that we have, again, champions looking to keep this open and regulate versus ban. So Congressman Andy Barr kind of started that. That was back in May. And then this month, we saw a lot of AGAPROPE's amendments submitted. There were 4 in total, all 3 from Republicans, 2 from Kentucky, 1 from South Carolina, and 1 from a Democrat in Minnesota. All were seen as non-germane, but again, showed urgency in wanting to regulate versus banning. And we continue to see engagement from the White House, in particular instances, mostly with Andy Barr's, which has been the most publicized bill that's been circulated. And I think there's just a lot of awareness because that language has been introduced. People know kind of what the components of it are. And then we're going to jump into what's happened over the last day. So yesterday, and this is probably the biggest momentum shift we've seen, and one that had very specific call to actions. This was the letter from the Executive Office of the President, the Office of Management and Budget, which is asking Congress to pass a supplemental funding bill, which included in there direction on changes that were needed to hemp. Most importantly, and I highlighted this in the upper right-hand side of the screen for you, furthermore, the administration requests additional authorities that it strongly supports. These authorities include revising the federal regulation of hemp to ensure the fair treatment of hemp products in a manner consistent with Amendment 54 offered to H.R. 8646 in the House Rules Committee. That is Andy Barr's amendment. So his bill, essentially, that he introduced and was found non-germane. Or, at minimum, an extension of the implementation of the regulatory framework put in place by Section 781 of Public Law 11937. That is the implementation of that 0.4 milligrams of THC per container. So it's an extension or something similar to the Barr bill that they want to see attached to this supplemental funding bill. That is a huge, very specific ask, because at this point we have seen some language of the Barr bill. We expect to see more formalized language be introduced in the near future. But the fact that an extension and or a full regulatory framework similar to Barr's bill, which would definitely provide a pathway forward for hemp-derived THC beverages, is a huge opportunity, and one that we really need to make sure that we continue the momentum for. But by doing that, we need to show that we are dedicated to getting regulation in place, because there are concerns with extensions. There are concerns about regulatory bills that don't include all of the components that we need to see to even the playing field with some of our alcohol partners, but also create the landscape that cleans up the marketplace. Because ultimately, this all comes down to Congress wanting to protect consumers and making sure that the Wild West, as we've heard about it, right? That some of these counterfeit and high synthetic products are removed from the marketplace. So public safety is still at the core of this. And at the end of the day, the CMS program is about the health and wellness products in the Medicare system. So we need to get the language right and work with Congressman Barr and others on providing a solution that Congress can get on board with. Because at the end of the day, Congress is going to be the one that makes the decision on how this is corrected. But urgency from the White House is imperative and obviously critical to this. And the fact that we are being mentioned in must-pass bills like the supplemental funding bill is incredible. similar. This is a monumental move. It reminds me very much of how it was when we were holding up funding the government. We have made an issue that they probably didn't have on their radar a few years ago into something that is being included and highlighted by the president and the White House for a must-pass bill. That is amazing. So I hope you all take a moment to celebrate that. And that was your moment, because now we get to work. It is a huge moment, and it's great to have that momentum. But now we really have to show that we are dedicated to that regulation. So there's some absolutes here. So first, the CMS program requires a definition change. We've already touched on that. That creates the opportunity and the urgency. The election poses a challenge because it limits the number of days that they are going to be focused on any issue, because there is an election come November. So October kind of comes off the map in terms of them being able to, work on this issue and others. Time is running out. We are going down on the shot clock, if you will, in terms of how many days, which we'll talk about in a little bit when it comes to how we utilize best utilize our resources. Then you have the White House Office of Management and Budget letter. That creates the urgency. So we're going to take that and we are going to run with it. The ask from that letter, as I mentioned, is that they attach a solution to the supplemental bill. So we need to focus on getting the regulatory framework together or an extension. But it is important for all of you to know that the CR is still a viable path in September if the supplemental bill does not move. But we also need bill introduction. For example, Barr's bill has not been formally introduced again. So there could be changes to that language, which could pose opportunities for us. There could be language in that bill that maybe we still want to modify or creates opposition or challenges that impact some of our either allies or our opponents in this matter. So it is important that we focus on getting the language right, and we continue to work with Andy Barr and others to create something that we believe is passable that can get Congress behind it. Education and what I call mediation. We have had opposition against us in the past. And while I think hemp beverage is very well positioned and has less opponents than maybe other categories within hemp, we absolutely still have opposition. And it's due to needing the even playing field on the alcohol side and really abiding by similar regulations, which we'll jump into in a little bit later here. But it's also because there's still a lot of misconceptions about what's in the marketplace. What is synthetic versus not? There's verbiage and vernacular that we really need to iron out. We're getting better, and we're certainly getting closer to finding these solutions and coming up with like happy middle ground. But it's not done, and we obviously have limited time. We also need to be working to get co-sponsors and support. So when this legislation is formally introduced, that's when our lobbyists hit the hill. And I've said it before, right now we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, meaning that extensions have been floated and other things have been kind of put out there. But until there's a bill introduced that has the language that the White House and others are comfortable with, it's hard to take a meeting with a member and tell them exactly what we need. The call to action that we actually want is to get one of these full regulatory bills across, and maybe an extension is what we get in the meantime while we try to get those bills across. Because getting a full regulatory bill done by November 12th is slim to none. Anything is possible because it's the way the government operates, but it is going to be difficult. So it is very possible that an extension is what we get, but the extension might have guardrails in place, or it will be limited, like a 6-month or time extension to get a bill across, not so that we can continue to kick the can down the road. Because again, they want to clean up the marketplace, they want to be able to enforce regulation, and they want to create a federal baseline for the state so they can continue to regulate. So potential outcomes and opportunities. I've highlighted what the 4 are. One is that the CMS program is all that gets through, because we know that that's what the White House and Trump and Kessler have been primarily supporting and prioritizing. The question there, and like I said in the very beginning, regardless of what happens in November, beverage is not going to be done fighting. Our partners are not going to be done fighting. The wholesalers, the retailers, they want this category. So the question then becomes, how long before we can get beverages back online? But with the momentum of the White House, we are going to focus on the other options right now and where we believe opportunity lies. So then there's the opportunity for a date adjustment. And again, this is somewhat of an extension, but because November 12th is hovering out there a little over a week after the election and nothing's likely to get done between the election and November 12th, there is a good chance that the CR changes that deadline if we aren't able to get an adjustment in the supplemental funding bill per the White House letter. And then there's, of course, the extension option, which could be a longer term option than the CR, than just the CR in September. Now, that could be attached to the CR, that could be attached to the funding bill. There's some options in terms of how we can get an extension and what that vessel is. But when I say the date adjustment for the CR in September, there's likelihood that the September CR is pushed to December, where they could get an end of year funding package done. Whether or not that date is something that changes with us or for us, that is questionable. There's a lot of different ways this could go, but essentially this comes down to CMS program, date adjustments or extensions, and the supplemental funding bill package. So options, good options, but we still need to work all of them simultaneously so we're not single-threaded. And we're not single-threaded because there's also standalone legislation. We are obviously waiting on the Legal Hemp Protection Act, which is the bar bill, to be finalized and introduced. And then there's also the Beth Van Dyne bill out of Texas, the hemp-derived beverage regulatory clarity act, which is also pre-introduction, but was heavily publicized in the marijuana moment. And it's in discussion draft, a lot of focus on that because it is a beverage only bill. It is very similar to FAA regulation. We'll dive into those specifics a little bit later. But ultimately, what you guys need to know about all of this is the fact that we do have multiple vessels where beverage could find a fix. Now we're going to jump a little bit into the specifics of the different bills so that you understand what these standalone bills will look like and what potentially could end up in that supplemental funding package. So the Lawful Hemp Protection Act, this is Andy Barr's bill. Andy Barr won his primary last month, which was very much because of the endorsement of President Trump. And of course, now we're seeing the mention of his amendment in the supplemental funding bill package memo. This was and still is technically the leading vessel for a regulatory fix. It's been the most publicized, and again, that's just been continued and reinforced yesterday. The timeline for this to be introduced is the near future. The goals of this from Andy Barr are to support Kentucky farmers, introduce a passable bill, and our goal is to get the beverage language right. And he's been very vocal about that because he's also chair of the Bourbon Caucus. So he works very closely with alcohol suppliers as well. The bill contents, at least in the most recent draft, include CMS language. So it includes a fix that the president and Kessler would need to see for that CMS pilot program to exist beyond November 12th. It includes a 3-tier structure. It evens the playing field, if you will. It makes direct-to-consumer a state-level issue for beverage, which is how it is for Kentucky. Taxation is for 5 cents per milligram of D9 THC, so the intoxicating ingredient. With alcohol, they tax the intoxicating ingredient, not the other ingredients. So we'd like to see parity there on the alcohol front. Dosage is right now determined by the FDA that they are given an 18-month window. Again, this is all pre-introduction, so it is possible that what we see next is different. And he mentioned that we might have some opposition. And the main reason for that is because alcohol suppliers and marijuana want to see different things. Now, the marijuana industry, when they see a bill and it's inclusive of multiple categories, not just beverage, obviously that threatens the infrastructure that they've built. And we know that the adult rec side is taxed very differently with a 280E penalty package or penalty, a tax penalty, and no deductions, things like that, that make it very difficult to execute a functioning business. But on the low-dose beverage side, we don't have as much opposition because low-dose THC beverage does not perform particularly well within the dispensary channel for a variety of reasons. Alcohol suppliers want to see parity. They want to see trade practice laws. They want to see things that are generally included in the Federal Alcohol Administration Act, which is the alcohol framework that we see at the federal level. That is very much what the Beth Van Dyne bill looks like. And this, again, pre-introduction's been circulated, so therefore this information's been publicized, but we could very well see changes. Congressman Van Dyne is out of Texas. Texas is obviously a state where we heard, we got a veto last summer. That veto like heard around the U.S. Because it was a highly publicized state. It is a huge market for THC beverages as well as intoxicating hemp in general. And to have a female on Ways and Means Committee come out with a regulatory framework that so closely resembles the alcohol regulatory framework is what our alcohol suppliers and some of our opponents have wanted to see from the beverage side in particular, because we keep saying we want to be regulated like alcohol. So we got to show them a bill that regulates them like alcohol. So this one is intentionally left to focus on beverage and be flexible. So it does not include CMS language, which means it is very flexible for being attached to or combined with other legislation that people find passable. It does promote 3-tier system and puts D2C as a state level issue for beverage. The taxation right now was 10 cents per milligram of any cannabinoid. There are a lot of us trying to work on that because that means CBD, CBG, and other cannabinoids could be taxed. We are continuing to work with Van Dyne's office very closely to kind of create that parity that we talked about with alcohol, where they only tax the intoxicating cannabinoid. Dosage was 5 milligrams per serving. It did include language for 12-ounce form factors as well as 750 multi-serving products. It did include TTB as well as trade practice laws. It also included a research component for that intoxication and impairment study. And the reason for that is because law enforcement wants to be able to enforce regulation. And to do that, they need more information because we don't have the same science behind, 0.08 blood level, when it comes to breathalyzers and things like that. We don't have that stuff yet. So we want to research and be able to fund that research through taxation and other, through bills like this, so that we can get that information and regulate effectively to protect the consumer and create a platform for law enforcement to enforce regulation fairly and accurately. And again, this is the closest to FAA, Federal Alcohol Administration Act language that we've seen. So it's very much what the alcohol industry wants to see from the hemp beverage side. So we are very closely working with both, and having these two options available to us it does not hurt us. They're not competing with each other. What we need to do is stay consistent with our ask, which is regulate us like alcohol and continue to work on improving the language. Now, who's in our corner? So many of you have seen these logos up here before. BAMCO, the Beverage Alcohol Merchants Coalition, one of the newest groups on the Hill federally, as well as the Beverage Wholesalers for Responsible Regulation, which really represents the middle tier wholesalers and has a number, I believe, over 60 beer wholesalers as members. Then there's alcohol and some of the other liquor groups like American Beverage Licensees, the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America, who've been our longest standing champion, the Brewers Association, who's really kind of remained a little, probably more neutral, but I definitely have been putting out information where they are supportive of an alcohol regulatory framework. And then there's the National Association of Convenience Stores, which has come out in favor more publicly about supporting regulation around intoxicating hemp, particularly beverages. And then the most recent one, which came out last week after Van Dyne's bill was circulated, the National Restaurant Association. And this is important for a variety of reasons. They represent a different tier that hasn't been vocal publicly, and they are a very large consumer-facing tier. And what that means is, if you just think of like everyday people, they are very familiar with liquor stores, they're very familiar with convenience stores. People go out to eat all the time, they're familiar with restaurants and hospitality. That is the same for everyone who works on the Hill. They're familiar with DoorDash and want service providers like that to have that capability because they utilize those services. They go to restaurants all the time. Anyone who's been to DC knows that this is an eating and drinking town. So they can very much relate to that. So having their support and having them be vocal is incredibly helpful to us. Talking about our allies and potential challengers, I wanted to stop for a second and go into what some people have seen as challenges and why they maybe haven't been able to take a stance publicly in support of what we are advocating for. Over the last couple of weeks at a number of events, there were a lot of people surprised by who some of our opposition or at least challengers were and that they weren't in support. So I wanted to take a second to kind of revisit that. Alcohol suppliers want an even playing field. Trade practices comes up more often than not, which is slotting fees in particular comes up a lot. So the fact that right now hemp-derived THC beverages can pay for premier slotting or end caps at retail, things that alcohol brands are not able to do. They also don't like the marketing against alcohol. You don't really see commercials, and this is why, but you don't see commercials for beer saying we're better than wine. You don't see wine saying we're better than spirits. And you don't have spirits telling anyone, hey, we have less sugar in our product, so you're less likely to get a hangover. We have a lot of those groups try to own the occasion and talk about why their product is refreshing or ideal for a specific scenario or use case. They show a lifestyle. They want us to play by similar regulations and guardrails to show support and general support for adult beverages. So marketing against alcohol, putting down alcohol, talking about how alcohol is dangerous. Anyone who has consumed alcohol knows what those risks are. There's plenty of information out there. I think they even have to fund education about what alcohol can do. And they funded research to understand how to regulate more effectively and enforce regulations. They want to see us do the same thing so that we can be good stewards of the adult beverage marketplace. They want to see taxation that's more on par with spirits as well as, beer and wine. Beer and wine are taxed lower than spirits. And I do want to flag for everyone that we might have to start at a higher tax rate because we're coming out of prohibition. And it's important that we start somewhere and then work on improving it over time. So that might mean that we have to swallow the bitter pill because the cyanide pill is much worse. So the bitter pill of having slightly higher taxation or something that might seem unfair compared to alcohol, they've been legal for 93 years and have had to lobby since prohibition on improving their regulations. We need to do that too. We're not going to get perfection. We are going to get progress and we need a foot in the door. So that's where we're at right now. So just want everyone to have that because there might be a moment where we get something and we're like, it's not perfect. And we're going to have to be okay with that. And I'm going to ask you guys to be okay with that because we need to get our foot in the door because November 12th is coming. Marijuana. Beverage really isn't their primary concern, not low dose beverage. Someone actually said it to me perfectly because our coalition is called the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives. And they said the reason that they didn't see us as like a real competitor was because they were like, you're right, you're an adult beverage alternative. You're not a cannabis alternative. Because many people who are consider themselves cannabis consumers are looking for different form factors, different dosages than what we're offering. We're offering another adult beverage and our target consumer is slightly different than who's going into the dispensary. I think they also see us as the key to normalization of THC and potentially cannabis in the future. And we've always seen ourselves as kind of the tip of the spear there. But they absolutely want to see form factor limitations, dosage caps, taxation, because as I mentioned, marijuana is taxed very differently than how hemp is right now. And they want to find pathways to market. They want a clear regulatory framework and they want us working within a regulatory framework. Our partners are amazing, as I just went through a lot of them. They have political capital. They are phenomenal at helping with the education component. For example, we can talk a lot about our products, the hemp beverage products, how they are manufactured, talking about THC and the impacts that we know it has, experiences and data that we've seen in the dispensary channel versus when these are where other adult beverages are sold and served. WSWA and NBWA and the retailers are great at talking about how the alcohol regulatory framework or the three-tier system is effective at collecting taxation at the appropriate stage, funding different components, keeping counterfeit product out of mainstream retail. That's incredibly important when you're talking so much about consumer safety. Those pieces, they add a lot of credibility. They execute a lot of fly-ins, and that we've taken a lot of meetings. Our group's taken a lot of meetings. These groups have taken meetings on this issue. They've had fly-ins where hemp and hemp beverage are one of their top 3 concerns. So it's being done. The work is being done. And what we need to do, and what they've done a great job of, is mobilizing their members, raising awareness, and neutralizing and negotiating with opponents. because the more collaborators and people we get in support and working with us on getting regulation across the line, that is critical to our survival and future success of our category. And right now, we are not in a great negotiating stance with the 0.4 milligrams of THC per container. So we might have to swallow a little bit of that bitter pill, but the bitter pill is much better than the cyanide pill. And to be fair, I did get a little bit of the bitter versus cyanide pill from Blake Patterson over at Keef Brands, who operates on both sides of the plant. So marijuana is a very different place to operate than hemp. And, where we want to lie, a little bit of bitter isn't the end of the world. Hierarchy of influence. I think sometimes we are within our own bubble of hemp and we all get in the room together. We talk a lot about how much influence and power we have. But I wanted to show you why we're looked at probably a little bit differently than some of the others. Not only are we new and we're emerging out of prohibition, but we're about $1 billion if you look at Brightfield's research studies. The other partners we have are multi-billion dollar, we're talking 10, 11, 12 figures of business per year. I always put this here because when we see the National Restaurant Association speak out on some of these issues, when we see the beer wholesalers and the wine wholesalers talk about our industry, when we see NACS coming out with a statement asking for regulation, when we see liquor stores creating a federal group, they represent billions and billions of dollars. I mean, the hospitality and food service group in total is 1.1 trillion, according to, some of the research studies I found. Those are incredible numbers, right? And they work in highly regulated channels. So they've proven it can be done. It can be done safely and appropriately and include all of the parameters that our opponents want to see. These partners are ultimately what are going to help us get this out of the over the line. And it's important that we understand that we have some influence and we can be good partners to them, but ultimately we need their support to get this done. State activity. I do want to touch on state activity. I also want to talk about what even the playing field looks like a little bit. We do currently have, I believe, 28 states with regulation and growing. There's a number of states currently working on that progress versus perfection. Right now, there is literally in committee and on the floor right now in South Carolina, they are debating a bill on hemp as we speak, unless it's ended while I've been on this call. But there's been a lot of activity. Ultimately, we need to continue that momentum because the states who have these infrastructures are going to want to keep them and maintain them. The good news is we do have some really good examples, and I'm going to highlight 3 of them, of states that have implemented regulation like adult beverage, and as a result have created an opportunity for us to use as case studies at the federal level. Kentucky, Alabama, and Tennessee. They're regulated by ABC. They are taxed, they are 21 plus, they have 3-tier influence. Some of them have different channels to market or require different licensing. They have different dosage caps in terms of what they permit per state, and they do vary on premise and whether or not that is permitted. But these systems are working. And many of these states are states that would have potentially never legalized marijuana, and they have fully functioning intoxicating hemp programs. These examples are exactly what we can use to show that we can demonstrate at the federal level that we want to operate within that 3-tier system. We want to be in the alcohol regulatory framework because it's happening in some states and it's working well. And we're not having to rebuild an infrastructure. We're putting our category into an existing working infrastructure. The other reason I wanted to highlight this is because I think there's been a lot of confusion that some of these state programs can operate as they currently are if the federal ban goes into place. If the federal ban goes into place in November and anything over 0.4 milligrams per container of THC becomes marijuana Schedule 1, we are in a completely different ballgame. Could a state level program exist? Yes, but it's incredibly complicated, and whether or not you can actually execute it, it's tough. It's really tough. And it won't look like it is today, and here's why. It's mainly because of supply chain and logistical complications, as well as the fact that you are looking at dealing with Schedule 1 operations, which means that 280E tax penalty, which usually means your product is taxed at 70 to 80%. You don't get traditional deductions that a normal business gets. Credit cards, the national ones, Amex, all of those, they are not going to be willing to process payment for something that is a Schedule 1 drug. Banks might not bank for that business if they are operating in this. For wholesalers and retailers, this could put your state or federal licenses at risk. And it's important that everyone on this call understands that even though we are a fast growing category, and the fastest growing category adult beverage is seen in a long, long, long time, we are not larger than their alcohol business. So they are not going to risk their alcohol business for an emerging category. Marijuana might not be legal in that state. So how does that work if you don't have proper licensing and it's not legal there? So where can you operate? Is hemp grown in the state? Is marijuana grown in the state? Is it even scalable? Manufacturing, because you're not going to have interstate commerce, so can you manufacture and get the materials you need to make these products? If you can't bank and you can't use credit cards to process payment and conduct a transaction, then Total Wine, Circle K, groups like that, are they going to have a separate cash wrap and collect cash? No, not likely. I'm not going to speak on behalf of any of them. But those are some of the complications that come with a state level program. So I don't want anyone on this call to be like, oh, well, at least we have states with regulation because we can just lean on that. Those drastically change if the federal landscape changes. Not saying some states won't fight and try to keep them open in certain ways, but it's why we need to mobilize those states now, because those infrastructures will look very, very different. So where are we right now? This was the timeline I presented, I believe, at the beginning of the year in terms of what to expect the year to look like. And we are at the end of June, where we expect initial retailer and wholesale inventory to start to decline and to start seeing that chilling period. As of right now, we have seen really nothing but growth of this industry. We haven't seen people hold back. I know I've heard from some groups that there are certain more regional retailers that have either stopped carrying the product or have really started watching inventory. And we will continue to see that if we don't see an adjustment. But, what we talked about at BevNet a couple of weeks ago, the consumer demand hasn't changed. And ultimately, if we can get the consumer to speak up and we can get the consumer to be heard federally, constituents get what they want, not overnight, but the louder we can make them, the louder the ask and the demand to keep this category open, and potentially others, but obviously we focus on beverage here, to keep it open. Wholesalers and retailers are still selling product, and they're selling it well. We've seen a lot of movement in a positive direction. So we're going to jump into kind of market stability and growth, because we are starting to see a lot of this continue, even with a federal ban coming November 12th. So the buzz is building, if you will. Off-premise has continued to grow. We are seeing beverage sales grow. Nielsen has been publishing more data on the growth of this category. There's over 1,100 SKUs in their system and over 200 brands. I can tell you from working with a number of the brands and their supply chain partners that there's probably closer to 500 brands. And the reason I say that is because for certain groups to be able to collect their data, they have to register their products with their system. So if they're not being registered, they're not getting picked up and categorized appropriately. But the other reason for this is there's a bunch of regional brands, like craft beer. So you're going to see a bunch pop up. So there's probably hundreds of more brands that are kind of falling under the radar here. So I would say a lot of this is probably more the floor than the ceiling, which I think is an important thing for us all to know. Spins is also calculating data, and if you purchase their reports, you can see more information on what these brands look like. But again, it's about making sure these products are being captured appropriately at retail, and different groups have access to different sorts of retail. So like Nielsen's done a great job of capturing C-store data. They're very engaged, excuse me, with C-stores, and Spins is collecting from another number of other channels too. But it's important to look at all of the data kind of collectively and get some insights on where the market is going, but also use the information that I just went over to make business decisions on how you are preparing your brand if we do hit that stutter step in November. I did also want to highlight that their VIP, which is one of the groups that captures data for the alcohol industry, particularly leveraging wholesalers and brands, did a collaborative report with the Hemp-Beverage Alliance. This report, I believe, was like officially released at their show last week in Austin. They had some key findings. This QR code on the screen will take you to where you can download the free snapshot or purchase the report, which is, I believe, $499. This report covers growth from 2024 to 2025. It includes data from 26 suppliers, many of which are some of the leading ones in the category. It showed some incredible growth, which I don't think any of us are necessarily surprised by, but really great to have data come from such a reputable platform, because these are the platforms that a lot of the wholesalers use to track sales, not only between, through retail, but also on premise and other categories that might not always be tracked the same way. Also, I thought it was a fun fact that it did show that lower dose products were gaining traction, because I've always been an advocate for the fact that the lower dose products are the ones that onboard new consumers, and we can't leave those guys behind. I'm also a 2.5 milligram girly, so I want access to those products. All form factors are growing. Nielsen also provided some data on the categories that they were seeing growth in and kind of dominating the space. Again, it does vary by retailer, but we saw a lot of THC sodas and seltzers kind of dominating the mix, as well as mocktail flavors. Other is kind of the cure-all or catch-all, if you will, for anything outside of kind of the top 5 categories. But found that really interesting to see what flavor profiles were performing particularly well in the Nielsen data. Also, one thing that's particularly important and is very helpful with members or meetings with members, staffers, or even regulators, is to make sure they understand who our target consumer is. We talk a lot about our target consumer being the 30 to 45-year-old female, and that the consumer 55 plus, the boomers, is also growing rapidly. But when they hear hemp or cannabis, they don't always think of that consumer. So when we put in front of them that the top performing products that people are buying alongside THC beverage is Pinot Grigio, Prosecco, Veuve, seltzers, light beer, and then Buffalo Trace somehow like crept into the top 5, it goes to show who's buying these products. What some of the retailers also shared is that they were seeing these products purchased between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. What's interesting about that to me is that generally, and historically, this has always been the case, but the females always controlled the credit card at the home, and therefore products are being purchased by the homemaker, the caretaker who's purchasing the products for the family, picking up maybe the Buffalo Trace. I hate to say just for a husband, because I think women who drink Buffalo Trace look really badass doing it, but it goes to show who's purchasing these products, and that this is not who they are picturing when they hear hemp or cannabis. So making sure that you drop those anecdotes, they can picture who that consumer is. We also have a lot of data that's showing that this is people who have degrees that are making, this is upper middle class. This is, again, not who they are picturing purchasing these products. Channel expansion has continued to grow. Liquor is still the largest channel, but C-store is growing rapidly. Grocery has entered the chat, and they will be probably the biggest growth market once fully tapped. And again, that's going to come from regulatory clarity to get some of those larger partners on board. And then again, the top performing SKUs, we're seeing the 10 milligram per serving or higher be the best performing, but the low dose options are the ones that drive volume. And for everyone on this call, we will likely see a dosage cap at one point federally, and maybe states' rights for them to build beyond that, so that states like Tennessee and Kentucky can keep their regulations the way they are, or I should say Alabama. But where was I going with that? Right now, we will probably see at the federal level a dosage cap of somewhere around 5 milligrams. Getting higher than that, maybe 10. Not saying it's impossible, but I want everyone to brace themselves for that. And people will buy that. They're not, if they don't have access to 10 milligrams and what those other products, they're still going to buy those 5 milligrams. And that's a starting point. We also want sessionability. Hospitality is about the volume game. people will sip multiples. I'm someone that has to split a 5 milligram with someone else, or I've got to break it up. So I think that we will see consumer behavior change based on getting that federal clarity, because that's going to open up other markets and other channels that we haven't seen before. And then we'll get a full picture of what our consumer base really looks like. And we are still seeing milestones achieved each and every month. So, we were just at BevNet a couple weeks ago, a lot of excitement still around the category, even with a federal ban, kind of looming there in the future. But at the end of it, we got a cherry on top. Dadgrass was crowned the champion of the new Beverage Showdown. They are the third hemp-derived THC beverage. I guess technically when Can won, they were only in the marijuana channel at the time. But they are the champion of the new Beverage Showdown, and this is the third THC beverage to win. And that is a milestone, the fact that they are still seeing like, hey, we believe that this beverage has a pathway forward. And just so you know, I've been at 4 shows over the last 5 weeks. Or I should actually say over the last 2.5 weeks, I've been at 4 shows. All of those shows have said the same thing. THC beverage will find a way. The how and the when is the question. We might have a stutter step in November, but no one's done fighting, and the consumer is going to want these products. So we will continue to bring attention to this regardless, and we will continue to break milestones. Target expanded into 3 states, knowing a federal ban was still on the horizon. We have seen brands still close investment deals over the last few months because people believe that beverage will find a way. We're seeing strategic partnerships still develop. So it's been really interesting that even with those risks, we are seeing potential growth and people believing in the category. And these are people that very much are aware of what's going on at the federal level. So I hope they know something I don't know. I don't think they do, candidly, but their support and their belief in it is helping us drive this momentum, because they're also being loud advocates at the federal level with us as well, which is great. November 12th, even with those milestones, still out there. And the reason I brought up the urgency piece earlier for everyone on this call is because the number of legislative days, because of the August recess and October, is probably closer to 30 days than the 140 that we're at today. It's 140 days until we get to November 12th. But in terms of legislative days, we are closer to 30. That's why when I say the urgency is there, when we ask for help or we ask for data or we ask for a letter to be sent, we're asking for you to do it that day, that night. Ask for help from our partner. Ask us if there's something we can provide you with to make it easier. That is going to be critical for us to move quickly. The more you guys can take some of these initiatives and run with them, find us partners for the things we're asking for, the quicker you can do that, the better, because we are really running on limited time here. And I'm not putting that number up to scare anybody, because we have a lot of momentum working in our favor. It is to understand the urgency of what is really going on. And at the Hemp Beverage Expo, I think we even counted the weeks on stage, and it's basically 6 weeks. So we have 6 active weeks where members will be in offices, where votes will be happening. And we are seeing a lot of delays right now. In the summer months, there is less activity and less opportunity, but it doesn't mean we won't take full advantage of those 30 days. We absolutely will. So then I want to talk about how we can support and certain things that we can ask of you right now. So we are looking for Republican attorney generals to get on board with a letter that is showing support for regulating hemp-derived THC beverages like other adult beverages, putting them in an alcohol regulatory framework. If you are based in Montana or have a partner that's based in Montana and you haven't spoken to me yet, please contact me. My email is on this screen right now, diana@adultbevalt.org. We are looking for some letters to be sent to a couple of our partners, and I will provide you with all the context and information and give you some samples that you might be able to use, but we need Montana constituents specifically. So if you're a manufacturer, wholesaler, brand, or just a constituent that wants hemp-derived THC beverages in your state, please reach out to me. We have some letter writing to do. We are waiting for bill introduction, and once there's a bill introduced, there will be massive call to action for people to sign on to letters to show support of that regulation. There will be probably there will be probably a more aggressive consumer awareness push, because we will want to make sure that Congress hears our support and constituent support for the regulation that's being proposed. So we'll talk about that in a second, because the Save Hemp Bevs campaign is still alive and well, and it is moving and growing more rapidly. Thank you to all of you that were at the Hemp Beverage Expo and BevNet that scanned my QR code, and we'll talk about that too. But also, it looks like everyone really started getting on that campaign after we started talking about it more at those events. So thank you to everyone who got engaged on that. But once the bill is introduced, we will be hitting the hill hard. We will want state reps to get behind it, co-sponsors. Constituent letters help with that. So we will be driving that consumer awareness campaign, but it doesn't mean you can't also submit a letter on behalf of your company to encourage your member of Congress, as well as your state organizations, to get engaged and become loud advocates for that regulation. And then there's the consumer awareness campaign, which, for many of you who saw me over the last few weeks, I've been walking around. I'm currently wearing it. I'm not really sure if you can see it right now, but I've been walking around with apparel that has QR codes on it, because I want everyone that comes in contact with me, although I can read a room and know when it's appropriate not to wear a sweatshirt with a QR code on it, but I want people to engage and know what they can do and be able to take action right away. There is a turnkey free program that you can take advantage of that WSWA created. The assets on the right-hand side of the screen right now are the assets that were pre-made and pre-designed for you to be able to utilize on social, as well as print out and use in your shipments, use for displays, all sorts of stuff. I put 2 additional QR codes on here, assets available. So if you want to print out some of the assets that you see here on the right-hand side of your screen, that QR code will take you to the brand assets folder. That's the QR code on the left under assets available here. And then if you like my shirt or want to buy other ones, I have created an account where you can buy them at cost for you and your team. I highly recommend, because I am not a designer. My designer knows this. So as a result, I made very simple ones that are available, that can scan from far away, and that are black and white. Do not be afraid to create your own using the QR code that is available in the brand assets folder, to create your own and design them and put your logo on them, create hats, create whatever you would like. I just wanted to create a turnkey option for people that wanted to purchase these for their teams, for their sales reps, to again encourage engagement, and a little bit to be silly, because if we can't have fun while we're doing this, what are we even doing? But I will throw it out there. Was really fun to wear them at the shows. If you scanned my QR code, thank you for doing that. But this campaign is imperative. As I said, constituents get what they want eventually. Congress and government and politics doesn't move particularly fast, but when constituents want something and they're loud about it, it's heard by the members, because constituents are the ones that vote them in. And the 30 to 45-year-old female isn't scoring so well with them, or I should say members aren't scoring so well with the 30 to 45-year-old female. And my favorite joke that I've been really leaning into is that anyone who knows a strong 30 to 45-year-old female knows if you take away something she really likes, you're going to hear about it. It doesn't go over well. So we are trying to make sure that members of Congress hear from our 30 to 45-year-old females, as well as our other 21 plus consumers that are purchasing these products and don't want to see them go away. All right, down to 3 minutes. I talked really fast to get through 28 slides, so I'm proud of myself here, because I did want to get to as many calls as possible, or I should say questions. So I'm going to look at questions right now. I'm almost confused because there aren't any. No one's asked any questions, which either means I did a great job or a terrible job. If anyone has questions, you can always email me. That is always an option, and I will get to you as soon as I can. If there are assets or tools that you guys are looking for to have members with or meetings with your members, please let me know. Whether it's me or another group that can provide that, we are all working together on providing a solution and getting this done, whether it's before November 12th or shortly thereafter. But the confidence that I want you guys to have, many of you are brands in the space. Our goal is to get this done so that we do not hit a stutter step in November. We just can't guarantee that we won't have a stutter step. I believe that Beverage will find a way through, and that it will be in the short term versus there being any sort of long-term prohibition. But I want every brand to know that there are options, and that we are seeing brands pivot and do adjustments. Excuse me. Pivot and do adjustments to creating uninfused product or sodas or other adaptogen-based drinks to maintain the brand and keep shelf space and wholesaler relationships. We're also seeing some brands expand into the marijuana. Oh, sorry about that, guys. We'll also see some brands expanding into the marijuana market, thinking that for short term they will do product in certain key markets where they have a high brand awareness and they can drive people to dispensaries. We've seen a lot of people really hunker down and focus on a handful of states where they have a foothold and are pumping the brakes on expansion so that they can spend their resources efficiently. There are a lot of things that brands can do during this time, but I definitely recommend you speak to your strategic partners, your supply chain partners, your wholesalers, your retailers, to understand how they are currently feeling and what they would like to see, excuse me, what they would like to see you do, or how they are going to proceed over the next 6 months, because that is going to be critical to your to ultimately your success and how we survive this. Policy goes between adult use and low dose hemp-derived product. That is a long conversation. There are a lot of different policy goals ultimately for adult use, and with adult use, I think it also varies based on if you're a multi-state operator or a smaller brand, because there are differences and less alignment between adult use product and product that is hemp derived and outside of the dispensary channel. But we can certainly include that in the next one. So I appreciate you bringing that up, James. I will definitely try to highlight that in the next one. With that, if there aren't any other questions, I will let you guys go, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And great to see so many of you at shows recently. It's always a treat for me to be able to see people face to face versus sometimes like this where I get to talk and just laugh at my own jokes. But thank you very much for attending, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if there's any way I can better support your day-to-day work in this space. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon, and I'll talk to you soon.